Magnus Carlsen missed the mate in one, my fellow chessers.
Hello, my fellow chessers.
I'm gonna show to you, my fellow chessers, the chess game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura entitled Cup 2024 Chess Game Review. Okay, as you can see, the position. So let's continue from the top. Okay, E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop to B5. Ruy Lopez, my fellow chessers. Knight F6, Berlin defense. Then D3, anti-Berlin defense. Bishop C5, C3, D5. And then knight B D2. Castles kingside. E takes D5. And then queen takes D5. Bishop C4 attacking the queen on G5. Then queen D8. B4 attacking the bishop on C5, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on bishop E7, and then castles kingside, and then A6, A4, knight D5, queen C2, rook E8, rook E1, then bishop F8. Mistake. The best continuation on this position is H6, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on bishop F8, mistake of Hikaru Nakamura, and then D4, then knight B6, mistake again of Hikaru Nakamura. The best continuation in this position is bishop on E6. That is the best continuation on this position. So let's continue on knight B6, knight B6, bishop B3, mistake. The best continuation on this position is bishop takes F7, my fellow chessers, sacrificing the bishop. And then if it take, and then we have queen takes H7, something like that. Then we have bishop E7, and then let's continue on rook takes E5. Wow, sacrificing. Then if we take this, we have knight takes E5, and then king E6. As you can see, my fellow chessers, the king of black is exposed, my fellow chessers, and we can see mate in 6, my fellow chessers. We continue. If we continue the game, queen G6, queen G6, king G5, and then we have queen F7, and then we have bishop E6, blocking the check. Then we have queen F3, and then king to D6. Then we have knight E4, my fellow chessers, and then we have king G5 only, and then we have knight C5, and we have king D6, and we have knight takes B7, checkmate, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on the game. Let's continue the game on bishop B3, bishop B3, then queen F6, blunder of Hikaru Nakamura. The best continuation on this position is bishop on E6, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on queen F6, knight E4, then queen G6, and then A5, attacking the knight on B6. So let's continue on knight D7, knight H4, and then queen H5, attacking the knight on H4. So knight G5, and then knight G8, and then knight HF3. H6, mistake or blunder of Hikaru Nakamura. The best continuation on this position is bishop E7, my fellow chessers. But let's continue the game. H6, and then knight E4, blunder of Magnus Carlsen. As you can see, my fellow chessers, we have queen H7, checkmate, and Magnus did not do that. Okay, didn't do that. So let's continue on knight E4, then queen G6, and then knight G3, queen takes C2, and then bishop takes C2, and then knight C6, and then bishop a4, and then knight d6, and then knight f5, and then knight f6, and then knight takes d6, mistake of Magnus Carlsen. The best continuation on this position is knight takes h6, who will sacrifice the knight, and we have, if you take the knight, and we have bishop takes c6, and then b takes c6, and we have d takes e5 for my fellow chessers. And if we continue the game on king h7, we have a e takes d6. If we take, we have this side, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on the real game. So let's continue on. Knight takes d6, and then c takes d6, and then d takes e5, and then d takes e5, and then bishop takes c6, and then b takes c6, and then rook takes e5, my fellow chessers. Rook takes e5, and then bishop g4, then bishop e3, and then bishop takes f3, and then rook takes f3, and then rook takes e8, rook takes e8, and then rook takes e8, and then g takes f3, and then knight g5, and then bishop d2, and then rook d8, mistake. The best continuation on this position is rook b8, rook b8 or f6, my fellow chessers, f6 or g6. So let's continue on. Rook b8, king f1, blunder of Magnus Carlsen. The best continuation on this position is c4, my fellow chessers. Wow. So let's continue on. King f1, and then knight b4, sacrificing the knight on b4. Knight takes b4, and then king e2, and then wait, c takes b4, and then rook takes d2. Okay, sacrificing, but we have this, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on. Rook c1, and then rook d4, rook takes c6, and then rook takes b4, and then rook takes a6, and then rook a4, king e2, and then rook a3, and then f4, g5, and then rook takes h6, and then rook takes a5, and then rook h5, attacking the pawn on g5, and we have rook a2 check, and then king f3, g takes f4, and then rook g5 check, and then king h7, and then rook g4, and then f5, attacking the rook on g4, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on. Rook g5, rook a3 check, and then king takes f4, and then rook h3, rook g2. As you can see, my fellow chessers, in this side we have balance, drawish drawish position. So let's continue on. Rook h3, and then rook g2, and then rook h5, king e5, king h6, f4, rook h3, then king takes f5, and then rook a3, and then king g4, rook a1, and then rook g3, king g6. We continue the game in this position, my fellow chessers. As you can see, this is this, and rook, and then something like that. We have blunder, my fellow chessers. We have blunder of mistake of Nakamura in rook a5. The best continuation on this position is rook a2, my fellow chessers. But let's continue on. Rook a5, mistake. King e6, blunder of Magnus Carlsen. The best continuation on this position is king g5, my fellow chessers, based on computer engine. So let's continue on. King e6, my fellow chessers, blunder, and then rook a6, mistake of Nakamura. The best continuation on this position is king takes h6, and we have rook a, and then we have rook a6 check, something like that. Maybe letter IF6, my fellow chessers. So let's continue on. Rook A6, then King F7, brilliant or good move by Magnus Carlsen. So Rook A5, and then F6, and then King takes H6, and then King F8, then Rook A7. As you can see, my fellow chessers, that's the game. So let's continue. We have F8 equals queen, and we have rook e2 check, and then king d7, then rook d2, and then we have queen to d6. Magnus Carlsen shield the queen. Okay, my fellow chessers. And then Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game. Why? Because if we take this and we have take this, as you can see, Magnus Carlsen, we have one extra rook on g8.